Environmental Ocean Policy team. And I'm going to walk through the agenda, but I just wanted to let everyone know that we are recording the meeting, and Lorna just started the recording, so we need to let you know in advance that we're doing that. I don't know if you all can see who's on the call, but I'll just run through the list. It's so you all are aware who's on the call. We've got Paul Moranti, Butch Smith, who is one of our Pacific Fishery Management Council representatives, Chris German from the Coast Guard, Dave Johnson, Dwight, and I'm not sure the last name for Dwight, and an attendee identified as a guest. We've got Larry Phillips, Bridget Meyer from our public outreach office, Phil Anderson, Randy Lado, Brett Weber, Ron Garner, Steve Westrick, and Mark Uwasa. Welcome, everyone. So again, just to restate, the purpose of the meeting is to discuss harvest limits and management measures for coastal bottomfish in 2025 and 2026. We aren't talking about any management measures for the Puget Sound. This is just strictly coastal. I'm going to do a bit of an overview of the management process and timeline for coastal bottomfish. It seems like the folks that are on this call are pretty familiar with that process. But I just wanted to say up front too that while we'll go through that process briefly, we really want to reserve a lot of the meeting time tonight for reviewing our management measure analysis and leave plenty of room for discussion. Next slide, Lorna. So the timeline for the groundfish biennial cycle, this graphic goes all the way from June of last year, June of 2023, where we adopted stock assessments and developed the process and schedule for these management measures. In September, the council starts scoping harvest specifications. When I say harvest specifications, those are federal limits that are come out of those stock assessments that we are managing to. In November, we adopt preliminary harvest specifications and catch limits. And then between November and January, the GMT and our state representatives on the GMT go through their preliminary analysis of all of those. So this meeting is a follow-up to a public meeting we held on January 17th of this year. At that meeting, we really got a first look at the analysis for Washington recreational management measures. And then this meeting is a follow-up to that, as I said, and really preparation for the April council meeting, where the council is scheduled to adopt final preferred harvest specifications or harvest limits and preliminary preferred management measures for public review. Usually what we've done and what we'll likely do again is hold another meeting before the June council meeting. And it's in June where the council takes final action on those rules. And the idea behind adopting the preliminary preferred alternative management measures in April that allows the public and other stakeholders to comment either through the meeting we hold in May or directly to the council before the council takes final action in June. After that, the National Marine Fisheries Service implements the regulations so that they're in place on January 1, 2025. After that, WDFW will adopt regulations that conform to those federal rules. And this process is for both commercial and recreational fisheries, but tonight we're really just focused on the Washington recreational fishery. Next slide, thank you. So really, and here, this is a graphic of some key stocks that impact our Washington recreational fisheries, really in terms of tracking them close to harvest levels. So what we've got are black rockfish, canary rockfish, and yellow eye rockfish. The canary and yellow eye rockfish have been constraining or had been constraining for really a long period of time since they were declared overfished back in I think 2004, 2005. We've seen the progress for yellow eye rebuilding moving forward, so that we're seeing harvest levels that have allowed us to reduce some of our management restrictions. And last year, we really focused our attention on vermilion rockfish, copper rockfish, and quillback rockfish. So I think it's helpful to review the current management measures that are in place. They were in place in 2023, and they'll be in place again in 2024 as a starting point. It gives a context for the discussion and a frame of reference. Again, as I said, for these 2 years, the key management tool that we implemented was non-retention for vermilion, copper, and quillback rockfish in May, June, and July. In past biennial cycles, again, largely due to the progress toward rebuilding for yellow eye rockfish, we've been able to really reduce the depth restrictions that have been in place, the 20 fathom depth restriction on the north coast and the 30 fathom depth restriction on the south coast. We have a recreational bottomfish season on the coast that runs from the second Saturday in March to the third Saturday in October. That's also aligns with the same opening for lingcod in all of those areas. We have daily limits in all marine areas, so it's a 9 bottomfish total with a sublimit of 7 rockfish, 1 cabezon, and 5 additional flatfish that are not that do not include the 12 surf perch and 15 shiner perch. Again, copper, quillback, vermilion, non-retention May, June, and July, and no retention of yellow eye rockfish. In the North Coast is marine areas 3 and 4, which is Nia Bay and La Push. We have a 20 fathom depth restriction that's in place June 1 through July 31, except lingcod, sablefish, Pacific cod, Boccaccio, silver gray, canary, widow, and yellowtail is allowed on halibut days. And yellowtail and widow rockfish are allowed seaward of that 20 fathom line in the month of July. In the South Coast, which is Marine Area 2, which is Westport, the 30 fathom depth restriction is closed to lingcod from May 1 to May 31, except on halibut days. There's a deep water lingcod closure that's closed except on halibut days, and June 1 to June 15th, and September 1 to September 30th. There are 2 YRCAs off of Westport that are currently open. The Columbia River, which is Marine Area 1, Ilwaco, and Chinook, lingcod is allowed with halibut on board north of the Washington border on days that are open to halibut fishing. There is the similar deep water lingcod closure in place for the same time period in Marine Area 1 that it's in place in Marine Area 2, that's June 1 through June 15th, and September 1 to September 30th. And then you can retain sablefish, Pacific cod, flatfish, yellowtail widow, canary, red stripe, green stripe, silver gray, chili pepper, boccaccio, and blue tekin um, on days, on halibut days. And I'll say here, because these allowances, the reason for them is they align with what's allowed in Oregon. And so we have a cooperative approach to how we set management measures for the Columbia River area. Okay, I think Lorna's going to walk us through the next slide. Unmute.
Yeah, it'd be good if I unmuted myself. So yeah, this is just to kind of orient everyone to the recent harvest guidelines and catch that we've had for the host of species that we focus on in the recreational fishery. And you can see I've highlighted canary and then bolded yellow-eye vermilion, copper, rockfish, quillback. So kind of linking back to what Heather was saying as far as some of the stocks that particularly guide our thinking with our management. So on this table, working from left to right, at the top there, you can see the harvest guidelines, or what we consider the limits for 2021 through 2024. So I'll give you some past idea for each of the species, what we've had for limits, and then also what we're looking at for this year. And then in the two columns to the right of those are the projected or preliminary harvest limits, rather, for 2025 and 2026. And then the actual mortality is in the last three columns for 21, 22, and 23. And I'll just flag here that these values have changed since what was shared in January. So we had, those were preliminary. We had additional biological data uploaded in January and February. And that biological data includes length and weight information that changes the conversions factors that we use to convert from numbers of fish to weight. So that's why you'll see some cases the total mortality went up for a few species. It also went down for some others, indicating that probably we're catching some smaller fish. So the overall weight or metric tons of fish caught in the estimate has gone down. So I think you can kind of see where we're at. I'll just look at, for black rockfish, I'll just highlight a few, not necessarily step through all of these, but for our recent catch in 2023, we're looking at 158 metric tons. Going forward, just to kind of give you contrast, the harvest guideline or limit in 2024 is 270. But that steps down in 2025 to 226 and 222 in the upcoming biennium. I'll skip canary because that'll be addressed at length here further. But for yellow-eye, you can see our catch in 2023 was 4.3 metric tons, and that is compared to a harvest limit of 7.9. And as this stock is rebuilding, we are seeing some increases in those harvest limits. So in 2025 and 2026, those go up to just over 8 at 8.1 and 8.3. Vermilion rockfish is one that is has a no retention rule. And in 2023, that was new, where those fish could not be retained in May, June, or July. We actually exceeded. So if you look at the 2023 value, we landed 0.85 metric tons against a 0.7, and that's rounded by, I believe it's less than 0.08. But anyway, we exceeded that harvest limit for our Washington portion. And I think that was largely due to it being a new rule. And once we were able to get like a extra push of outreach, it dropped. I could see that most of that overage came from May. And once folks got up to speed by June. The rest of the season it dropped, but that early initial kind of slug of catch pushed us over. We've worked on some outreach materials that will go out earlier this year. So I'm hoping that, and the fact that it's the second year in, we'll see that drop under the 0.7. And we're looking at sort of a consistent 0.75 and 0.74. So our harvest limits going forward aren't changing. So that'll be one we'll have to, I'll be tracking closely. Looking at copper rockfish, which is another one that has no retention in May, June, and July. Our catch was 1.4 metric tons for 2023 compared to a 1.9 metric ton limit in 2024, or I'm sorry, this year. And then also it'll be the same for the next couple of years. So if we can maintain at the 1.4 level, I think we're in a good situation there. Similarly with quillback, it's also one that cannot be retained in May, June, and July. And the 23 catch was 1.7 metric tons compared to a 2.2 harvest limit. So also like copper, those two species weren't as challenging, and they have a little bit higher limit, so it's not quite so constraining. And I think then the only other, maybe what I'll flag for folks, if you'd recalled from January, lingcod, that initial value was roughly like 220 metric tons, and the final estimate's now at 186. So that was quite a difference, decrease. And then yellow tile was also estimated earlier to be about 101 metric tons, and it's dropped to 88. So again, that was another one that decreased based on that upload of biological data. Kind of overall, just looking at the harvest guidelines, we're going to see generally a decline. In most cases, this won't pose a significant issue other than canary. And like I said, we'll address that here. So I think back to you, Heather, so we can talk about canary.
Yeah, thanks, Lorna. So really, yeah, canary is where we have focused a lot of attention in terms of where we look to alternatives for management measures. That's, again, you remember that timeline. There was when we got the results of the last round of stock assessments, there was a stock assessment done for canary rockfish in 2023. It really changed our understanding of the stock compared to the assessment that was done in 2015. In 2015, the stock was declared rebuilt, and Washington was incredibly cautious about reducing our restrictions on canary rockfish. We were very careful. We were concerned about canary and yellow vibe being confused, about also just really uncertainty with walking away from the restrictions. So we did that very carefully. This latest stock assessment was done. It now has canary back in the precautionary zone, and with much lower harvest levels than we've had since that last stock assessment. So on this next slide, you can see here on this top row here, we've got going back to 2017. So you get a little bit of the history of canary rockfish. The Washington Recreational Harvest Guideline has been between 50 and 40 metric tons from 2017 to 2024. And what we're looking at in 2025 and 2026 is 17, right around 17 metric tons, 17.1 and 17.2 metric tons. The mortality, and this really, I think, illustrates how careful we were about reducing our restrictions on canary rockfish, shows that we've gradually increased our catch of canary rockfish, going from about 5 metric tons in 2017 and 2018 to 13 and 8 metric tons in the next biennium. And then in the 2021-2022 biennium, we started to approach that 40 metric ton harvest line. And that was, I would say, intentional. We were really striving to release our restrictions and access that fish that we finally had access to. In 2023, we saw a big reduction in mortality for canary rockfish, dropping down to just over 20 metric tons. And what you see for 2024 is just a projection. And really, as we've done in a lot of these bienniums, we've got a projection there, and it just averages the 37 and 21 to give us some idea of where our catch in 2024 could be. And we put this table together. Yeah, this is a good place to pause. Steve, go ahead.
I don't want to interrupt you, but if you go on and can we come back to this chart later if you want to? I don't want to interrupt your
I was just
stuff,
gonna,
but this is kind of tell some important stuff here if we can come back to it.
It does,
because it's
I
not.
think so too.
Oh, it's number 8. I see. Okay.
Well, I'll just finish this. I just want to orient you to the bottom part of this this table, so you can see how exactly we have changed our management measures. So you can see just under the mortality row, that daily limit row is how we have gone from how we went from no retention to allowing the retention of 1 canary rockfish in 2017, 2 canary rockfish in 2018, and that did not include, don't know that included the North Coast when we first started allowing retention. And then we went straight from 2017, 2018 to no sublimit. Canary rockfish were just subject to the 7 rockfish sublimit in place, so no other sublimit. And then moving down a row, in Marine Area 1, we had that deep water lingcod closure that I was explaining. In 2017 through 2019, that deep water closure was closed year round, or the March through October. In 2020 through 2024, it was closed except for June 1 through June 15, and from September 1 through September 30th. Also, you can see here the 2 small YRCAs that were off of Westport. They were closed from 2017 through 2020, and then they opened in 2021 through 2024. Also in Marine Area 2 is that 30 fathom line closure. Starting in 2018, that closure was in place March 15th through June 15th. In 2020, that was March 9th through May 31. So again, gradually reducing those restrictions. I think the March 15th and the March 9th, those align with the opening of bottomfish season. And since 2021, that 30 fathom line has only been in place for the month of May. The deep water lingcod closure, 2017 in place year round. In 2018 and 2019, it was closed except June 1 to June 15th and September 1 to September 15th. And then since 2020, that closure has been in place year round except June 1 through 15 and September 1 through 30. Marine areas 3 and 4, we have the C-shaped RCA off the North Coast, and the 20 fathom line. And we didn't go into a lot of details about the time frame that the 20 fathom line was in place in this table, but would just note that we've also progressively reduced the time period that the 20 fathom line is in place. I think that's the summary. This is a good place for your comment or question, Steve.
Okay. I don't know if this is the right time to throw my spiel out there, but
Do you want to wait till we get to the discussion?
sure.
Okay.
Keep going.
We've got a little bit more information to share, so don't forget what you're going to say.
Okay, go girl.
Okay.
Hey, Heather.
Oh, looks like Phil has something to add here. Yeah, go ahead, Phil.
Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
The 2023 catch value of 22.1 is different than what was in the GMT report at the March council meeting. It was 25 and some change. It was 25. Is that because of the addition of the biological data you were talking about?
Yeah,
That would have caused that number to go down.
Yep, exactly. And you might remember when this happened for black rockfish, and what we've found, just our port samplers collect and rainfish samplers collect a ton of lengths and weights and all of that, and they air check that data, and the time frame when they're air checking it is over the winter. And so there was just a big update of that information that actually changed our estimates of catch. And was there another reason too, Lorna, that there was so much of that bio data uploaded, or really it's just
it was just, yeah, it was the so yeah, Phil, thanks. The 25 metric ton was preliminary. The 22 is the value after that biological data was uploaded, and that biological data was uploaded in 2 batches in like the latter part of January and the early part of February. And after, when a fair amount of some of the analytical work and reports were already underway. So unfortunately, some of the reports going forward are going to have that older value. I switched and redid the analysis to be using like the most current estimate we'd have, or what we consider the final. But yeah, the 22 is the final. And just, yeah, unfortunately, the timing of when that data gets uploaded during a spec cycle year is a little awkward.
That's fine. I thought that might be what it was, but just wanted to double check. Thank you.
Yeah. It wasn't fine when it happened. I kind of melted. So anyways, but yeah, a lot of good data. I think I think all of us from Washington can be really proud of the data that our field staff collect. If you're tracking anything about what's going in California, I think it's all for the good. So
that's an excellent.
Could I ask one more? Could I ask one more question while we're on this page?
Yeah, sure.
So the estimate for 2024 at 29.6, that's fairly precise. And I'm wondering, obviously that means there's a little over 7 ton increase from 23 to 24 that you're anticipating. And I'm just wondering what is behind the estimate being higher than what we did this year.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So just to use projections, I didn't want to just use 2023 because we have seen higher landings in years prior for Canary. So it's maybe a way to look at it is 2022 kind of represents a higher year 2023 is a low, so to kind of like couch what we might expect. And then I also only used 2022 and 2023 because those are the only 2 years where we had the same regulations and all the ports of Washington were open the whole year. So had we had a more stable regulatory history and no pandemic, I might have used a longer term average, but just a little bit constrained by what we can say is maybe what it will look like going forward. But noting it is saying it's higher, like a trend up.
Yeah, it would be at the appropriate time good to just do a little bit of discussion around that point, but because obviously the higher the anticipated catch, the more restrictive regular. Well, if I'm talking about going to 25, but if I'm just I think there are some other reasons you see that gradual decline from 39.5 to 37.1 to 22.1, and I don't. My perspective is that I don't see it going back up like that, but we can talk about that later.
Okay, thanks. I see Larry has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I was thinking on the same lines as Phil there. I think, we're gradually going down. I think I don't know if it's depletions. And that got me thinking about, if I remember right, are we under 40% unfished biomass? Are we 35 or something like that?
Yeah.
So it's,
Yep.
it's a dangerous spot to be.
Yeah, the projections are a little challenging for sure. And trying to have a solid rationale is not easy, especially when we don't have a long time series to work with. All right. I think I'll move to the next one if that covers questions. All right, so kind of to understand sort of what measures are needed or might work, obviously we need to reduce canary mortality. We start by exploring the catch history, sort of to learn where and when they were being caught. And so here in this figure, you can see canary mortality in metric tons for 2018 through 2023. So each box is a year. And then the months are across the bottom. And then each color represents a marine area. So we have marine area 4 is in yellow, marine area 3 is green, marine area 2 is blue, and marine area 1 is like really dark blue or dark purple. So overall, you can see a majority of canary are consistently caught in area 2. And let's see if I can make this. You see that? Hopefully you can see the cursor. Especially here, it's easier to see on the bottom 3 panels, which are 21, 22, and 23. So these blue bars, that is area 2 there, in June and September in particular. Whereas earlier we saw peaks in the previous years. You see peaks with canary more in May, a little less in June, and I think that's just reflecting where we saw those openers aligning with halibut days, or canary retention aligning with halibut days. Another drop or a pattern we see is the kind of, as you were just mentioning, overall just a general decline in the catch of canary from 21 to 23, and that's reflected in these panels here. It's just a general overall decline. Did a little bit of digging into this, and we do see a drop in catch per unit of effort. And so I'll separately investigate that further, but that is part of it. Also, other factors, it's hard to say exactly. Was there just less targeting? Other issues at play? So that's something kind of separate we'll be looking at, but it did decline from 22 to 23. And that's at play here in these reduced catches. Okay, going to the next slide here kind of would continue to dive into the catch data. Here we're looking specifically just at 22 and 23, which are the basis for our analyses. As I mentioned, these are the years where the regulations were similar or the same, and all the Washington coastal ports were open the full season. Again, we see here canary mortality with rows for each fishery. So the top row is bottomfish, the middle row here is halibut, and then the bottom is salmon. And again, the marine areas in the different colors and the months across the x-axis here. So, and then in red, you see the bottomfish trips in June and September, obviously really stand out as to where we see canary being retained across the different fisheries and across the different months. Good there. So with this kind of insight into where and when catch was occurring, the next step in the process is to develop and analyze some ideas or options that will effectively reduce catch. We know that without some action, we're more than likely going to exceed the limits in place for 2025 and 2026. And here, just on this table, you can see status quo. Again, our catches recently are all higher than what we're going to be able to catch in 25 and 26. So the idea is, could we use a sub-bag limit as an option? Monthly closures, would we look at perhaps closing certain months of the season or run a season until a certain point, and then if a trigger's reached, you'd close. Obviously, we could reconsider some of these deep water lingcod restrictions or the depth restrictions in general, such as the YRCAs or the rockfish closure areas or conservation areas. And what we've tried to do here is kind of analyze a broad range of options because with this process through the council and the federal regulation requirements, if we don't analyze an idea or option now, and when I say now, that is between like now and June, we can't use that as a management tool in 25 or 26 if, say, what we decide to implement doesn't appear to be accomplishing our objective and we need to try something in addition or something different. If we haven't analyzed it, then it's not available to us. So the idea here is just putting all the tools we could think of in the toolbox. I think that's it. And then here, I'll flag there was, I believe, a typo in the previous table. So the harvest guideline we should be working with is 17.3. And the values here in this table are sub-bag options. They are different than the work that was preliminarily shown in January due to some revisions to the bag limit analysis tool and also updates to the biodata. Where in January we were thinking we could get away with just a 5 or 6 fish bag limit and call it good. With this further analysis and deeper dive, we realized we do need to go a bit further than what we had anticipated earlier. So again, for this analysis, we used 2022 to represent a high year and 2023 to represent a low year under similar regulations. And using the average of these years, we're estimating a status quo that under the current regulation structure, we'd catch 29.6 metric tons. And then from there, we estimate the projected mortality and the associated savings by reducing the sub-bag limit progressively from 6 canary to 1 canary. And then looking at the bag limits here, you can see that to get below 17.3, we really only get there with the 3 fish bag limit if that's our only tool that we were going to use at this time. So I can pause there. I see Brett has his hand up for a question. So is this?
It's more of just a statement. I think your 29.6 is, I concur with Phil. It's a bit high. The places we encounter our lingcod has a lot to do with the composition of rockfish. But keep in mind that the people who were targeting canaries last year were not under any sort of restriction. They were targeting canaries wherever they could get them.
Mm-hmm.
That reduction in the number that you see from last year to the year before, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot different this year. Could be wrong, but with a little bit of outreach and telling people just don't bother targeting them all will really reduce the number of canaries. I could take all canaries, or I could take no canaries.
Mm-hmm.
I'd still prosecute a worthwhile trip. So I just don't want to see that taken off the table as an option.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. Thanks, Brett. I see Larry, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Lorna. So I guess I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but I'm curious how you calculate a savings from a sub bag limit. Are you using the actual like ratio of landed canaries that occur in the fishery at dockside sampling, or are you just taking a percentage right off the top of the total metric tons that are landed?
Yeah, no, thanks, Larry. So this looks at the actual interview data, and it looks at the number of anglers that had bag limits from 0 to 7, or even some illegal bag limits that show up in the interview data. And then, gosh, how to say this succinctly? It looks at then what the proportion is of the anglers and what the number of fish, and we translate that into metric tons, but we're stepping it down from the actual interview data. It's not just some percentage. This reflects the actual interviews done in 2023 and 2022. And they're each year is analyzed separately. And then those savings, or how you want to think of it, are averaged then for those 2 years.
Okay,
And
gotcha. So
using just one thing to add, Larry, using the OSP data, the sampler data, what we are able to look at too is retained and released. So we also know the portion that's retained and released. And
yeah, that's good. That's a good point. This does include retained and released. So
the only savings from a 3 fish bag limit would be for the folks the proportion of anglers who completed a trip that have 4, 5, 6, or 7 in their bag limit, or at dockside. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, and we did see a lot of, like, the data clearly show the targeting. I shared this earlier, but in 2022, about a quarter of the anglers were responsible for about 70% of the canary mortality at bag limits of 6 and 7. And it wasn't quite so high, but it was very similar in 2023. About 23% of the anglers were responsible for about 60% of the mortality. Again, it's bag limits of 6 and 7. So I think that, yeah, the way this data, or the way you see the projected mortality relative to projected savings, it just is very reflective of the pattern that we saw in the fishery of who was catching like targeting versus not, and the proportion of anglers and that kind of behavior across the fishery. So, let's see, Steve. You,
Hi, Lorna.
Hi.
So
Easy.
much appreciation for what you guys do, but I am going to respectfully disagree with that 29.6 number also. I've put it out there at the last couple of meetings, whatever, and any discussions we had, that deep water fishery, it went from basically 0 to 100% in a year or two when the RCA got open, and it was absolutely great. And anybody, you didn't have to be a professional fisherman. It was really good, and there was a lot of fish caught. Since then, all your graphs and from what we're telling you show that trend is going the other way. You know, from, it spiked up to 39, 37, went down. Last year it was at 22. And I've said this in the past, that this happens with a lot of fisheries that go on. It seems like the fad, I say, has really faded some. And the reason is it's because it's not as good out there. And so, I mean, I know you go by the numbers, and we're going to do what we're going to do in the end, but I don't, in my heart of hearts, I don't believe that number is going to be spiking up more than what happened last year at 22. And like Phil kind of started talking about, that number would directly reflect on the regulations that are imposed, sublimits or area closures or whatever. But I would hope that that we could talk about that number some more and come to some kind of lower amount. And because you show on all your graphs too that trend is going down, it's not going up. And so that's why I was like, why are we assuming that the projected mortality is going up from the last 3 years, I guess, 21, 22, and 23. So that's my 2 cents on that. And I haven't completely thought through all about all the sublimit stuff, but I'm hoping that we can talk about that number some more at some point.
I think I would like to talk about it too. I have questions, and I think for us, what's really hard to understand too is, and you said a little bit of it. One is it because people aren't targeting anymore, or like you said, is it because fishing is not as good? So one thing we wonder is, what if everyone was targeting? Or I think that's what makes it really hard for us to understand the difference.
Talking about 2 different things a little bit. I think the canary fishing was probably not as good as it was the other years, but it's the lingcod fishing that wasn't quite as good. And that's what gets all the boats out there. And the halibut, frankly, was not as good,
Right.
So,
but that's where
it's like canary is not the main draw to go to the canyon. It's when it's open for halibut or lingcod. And then next you go for canary. I know one charter boat, maybe 2, would go out on a regular bottom fishing trip out there and target canaries. And that happened a little bit in the year 21 when it was great, 21. But since then, no, that it's not that way.
I see.
It's the other fisheries that draw the people out there. And so that's why I'm saying that the canary thing is, we might don't take it personally, overreacting a little bit because the fishing wasn't great out there for lingcod or halibut, and it in my mind, I'm kind of hoping all the wreck fishers, and I know of one already that told me they kind of go back to their origin other areas, like area 1, or not area 1, but area 3 and 4. People that were here in 21, I'm thinking are going to go back to where they used to fish. And a person just told me on the dock the other day that said Westport got way too busy. I went to La Push last year, no one was there, and it was great, Anyway.
Yeah, and I think I appreciate your comments, Steve. Don't disagree. It's hard to look at a projection that's, substantially higher than what we just experienced in 2023. But some of your comments also give me pause, because if it's linked to the success or quality of lingcod and halibut, if in 25 and 26 those are good years, could we see something more similar to 23 or 22 than we saw in 2023? So that's where it's difficult, because we're looking out, not 2024, but we're looking out like 2 years and 3 years out, and hard to know what could happen with lingcod and our halibut seasons then. So yeah, I appreciate it feels high. It's just hard to know.
Yeah.
Well,
Where
where those fisheries will be, if those are the ones that draw people. And when we say, yeah, go ahead.
Well, fishermen, people are smart. They'll go wherever they can do the best. And that area was closed for how many, 15, 20 years. You close anywhere up the coast of where we go bottom fishing, you close it for 20 years and open it up, and it will be, it'll be the best ever. And that's what happened out there. And the word got out, and that area got decimated by just, there was on halibut days or whatever, there was over 100 boats out there. And the effort was incredible. And I'm in my head, the effort is coming back down to reality. It's the resource did get hammered, no doubt about it. Maybe we should have been a little more cautious, but who knew it was going to be as good as it did. And there's a lot, the internet and the sports shows, they're pumping Westport and all that. Makes me a little crazy, but it happens. And so anyway, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, very much so. Thanks.
We got Phil and Rhett.
I'm not sure what's coming, so I don't want to jump ahead. But I just would like to just reinforce, not that it necessarily needs it, that YCR RCA that got opened up, and the fishing success that was there, that was had by people that went there, was phenomenal. I can't think of an adjective to describe how good the fishing was for lingcod, for canary, and for halibut. And it has, as Steve said, and others will attest to, you can't put 100 boats on an area like that over and over and over and over and over and expect the fishing success to remain like it was. And it didn't. I think that is the biggest reason you see the decline over the 3-year period, is that area was so good but it got hammered, and the success rates just aren't as good. And I I really believe, that's why I believe that to suspect an increase of 7 tons from this year to next year, or whatever would come the year after, I think it's too high. But my second point is, to me, there's at least three moving pieces here. The first is, right now we have a difference of in round numbers of about 12 tons between what Washington's harvest guideline would be under status quo allocation. We'd get 17.3, and the estimate that you have for the year is, well, it's and I'm looking at 25, obviously. So, but I mean, if we were talking about 25 and we were talking about the 29 and we're talking about 12 metric ton difference is what we're looking for. And so you look over at the projected mortality and then at the projected savings, it's telling you you got to get to 12 or a little better. And the moving parts of this are, one, what is is 29 a real, is that the best guess we have? And we're suggesting that that's too high. Now, whether it's 27, or I'm certainly not going to argue if you're going to assume a higher catch than 22, but I don't think it ought to be a +7. The next, obviously, if that number changes, then getting that number from 12 down to 9 or 8 or something like that, that's one way that we help ourselves in terms of how many restrictions we have to put on.
Mm-hmm.
And bag limit is one that we can look at. I think there's a potential for some. I think the last 2 weeks of September you had in there, I mean, some sort of a time closure of the deep water, shortening the length of that is a tool. And then we have the third piece is the allocation itself. And as we know, the GMT put out there some different alternatives for the council to look at in terms of how canary are allocated between trawl and non-trawl, and on the non-trawl side between commercial and rec, and then on the rec side between the 3 states. And we know that the bottom for us is 17.3. If any one of those moved a little bit, it could get us up another 2 or 3 tons and narrow that gap even more. So to me, we're looking at, well, there's always a worst case, I guess, in what you're dealing with. But to me, this is the worst case scenario, is we're at 17.3 and the estimate's 29. And there are at least three pieces here that could move a little bit and narrow that gap up. That would result in us having to not take as many restrictive actions as we're currently contemplating, with a 12 and to 17 difference.
Yeah, I think those are really important points for the discussion, and yeah, I agree. I think Lorna and I were thinking along the same lines, more about how do we look at alternatives. But before we go to the next slide, though, give Rhett an opportunity to chime in.
Well, Phil pretty much covered what I was thinking. We went from a pretty restrictive regime on Canary to declaring it rebuilt and opening up takes in all fisheries, and yet everything here seems to be focused at sport, but kind of ignoring the fact that the trawl takes probably went up significantly, and that had more than a little impact on our ability to target these fish. I think I think that number again is way too high.
Thanks, Rhett.
All right, I think I'll go to the next slide here. So yeah, along the lines of looking at sub-bag limits and recognizing how the restrictions that or how restrictive they are. Some of these options here you can see were some we presented in January with just a range of ideas of season, from closing certain months. So I can just kind of walk through those. One idea was to just close May and July with no canary retention, which is similar to just the copper, quillback, and vermilion idea and concept. The next one was like an in-season closure to canary past a certain date, and this was just analyzed at something after June and what kind of savings we might expect to see. Looked at August, October with no canary retention. And again, kind of see there what the projected mortality and savings are. And then finally looking at a no retention of June only. And then a couple of ones that were canary sub-bag limits in May, and then one just on halibut days only, and I believe that was May only, and I dropped that. So that 2 canary halibut days only, I believe, was just for May. Then newer ones since our January meeting are all of those that they're listed for the deep water closure. And I'll note here in looking at these, and again, these weren't meant to be like the full, all possible options. It was just exploring a range of ideas. But those previous ones where they say no canary retention, the way those were analyzed did not include canary retention on halibut days. So making a distinction there where these that have the asterisk after the deep water closure. So there's the area 2, June 1 through 15, and then the September 1 through 30 in the next line. And then a September 1 through 15, and then a September 16 through 30. Those were all modeled just for bottomfish, salmon days, and other miscellaneous small fisheries that might have taken some canary, but they would allow retention of canary on halibut. And those then would be the projected savings. And obviously these by themselves, these deep water closure areas, if we revert back to closing, say June 1 through 15, you'd expect to have a 4.6 metric ton savings. Closing all of September has a 4.8. So roughly either of those achieves about a 5 metric ton savings. And then closing either half of September, you get about a 2.5 metric ton savings. So obviously those aren't standalone, where some of the other options could be standalone. You could have a standalone bag limit. These would not. But again, just trying to look at some ways and mechanisms, whether standalone or in combination, we can get to the 17.3. So as Phil was saying, we need to reduce by about 12 metric tons. So I will pause here before we move on. See, Dave, you were up with a question.
Yeah, Lorna, thanks. Did you do any of your modeling at, say, 23 metric tons? And or did you just do the one at 29.6?
I've only done 29.6. I think most of these, the way they're structured, I could run it with a lower, like a 2023 catch estimate. So I can do that. That's not like impossible for sure.
Yeah, it'd be more realistic numbers than this inflated number, because I would hate, especially on the North Coast, and I know guys on the South Coast, nobody wants to lose days of access to deep water. That's what we live for. That's what we want to do. And if we start taking away from deep water fishing, that's going to really hurt a lot of people. And I would hate to see that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And then Larry.
Well, I'm putting on my WDFW hat. I'm sure Phil's got his handy too, but I'm channeling the Captain Chadwick, and I'm thinking about, it seems to me that the easiest place, and I obviously don't want to speak for anybody but myself here, that is a sub bag limit, and possibly lining it up with the other sub bag limit of coppers, vermilion, and quillback. And I just think from an education standpoint, I know that's something I think Red or somebody brought up earlier, and just a consistency of regulations and ease of understanding seems like I'm with Dave. I don't want to lose any deep water opportunity. I think that's pretty important to folks, but just throwing it out there.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Larry. Yeah, that was really just the idea by having that as an option, is like just from that regulatory consistency with the other species, there wasn't a lot more, basis for that particular option. Dave?
Sorry, I'm taking it down.
Okay, wasn't sure if that was a legacy hand. That's fine. So no, I appreciate the comments and thinking about, this projected mortality, and your insights is really helpful. It's been difficult across all of the analyses, regardless of what species, just because of the lack of a good time series, and canary in particular, we don't have a lot of years, and so it's hard to say what's a trend, what isn't. Yeah, I think this is really good information.
I do too. I see we've got Steve and Rhett with their hands up, and if we have one more slide before we get into the discussion, are you guys ready? Okay, holding off.
Yeah, I can
For the
wait.
discussion for just one more slide.
Yeah,
No problem.
wait.
Okay. So
Because this will stir up more questions.
Yeah.
The next one will. Okay.
So, I mean, Lauren and I were looking at this last night, and the whole reason for having that last slide that we looked through and this big shopping cart of ideas was, and this is separate from the conversation about what is the starting point. Is it 29.6 or 22? Just separate from that, is there a way to think about combining management measures so that we wouldn't have to look at such a restrictive bag limit? And so what is on this slide combines the look at the bag limit with those other management measures to see if we can do dim sum approach to find a different alternative that maybe we can settle on. And again, this is separate from the conversation about what's the right starting point. So is starting with this alternative number one. This is just straight across 3 fish bag limit, as you saw from that table. It gets.
Did you switch the slides?
Did
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
You should see preliminary preferred alternative discussion.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So the first alternative, just the straight across 3 fish daily limit gets to mortality of 16.6, which is under that 17.3. If you look at a canary rockfish bag sublimit of 4 fish and combine that with reinstating the deep water closure from September 1 to September 30th, you add, almost another 5 metric tons, so that equates to a total mortality of 15.9 metric tons, also under the 17.3 level that we're looking at in 2025. A canary rockfish sublimit of 5 combined with the no canary retention in June, which, and as Lorna mentioned in that last slide, this one would include, you couldn't retain a halibut or couldn't retain canary on a halibut day. You get to 15 metric tons. And alternative 4, these are alternatives, just they're labeled alternative just for discussion. They can be rearranged to create different alternatives. This one is a rockfish daily sublimit of 3 combined with reinstating the deep water lingcod closure from June 1 to June 15th, and that gets to 12 metric tons. And the 3 fish sublimit combined with reinstating the deep water lingcod closure from September 1 to September 30th gets down to 11.8. So we wanted to look at ways to potentially combine different approaches and keep the sublimit at a little bit higher level, although I am noting what Dave said about not wanting to lose deep water, access to deep water. But anyway, this is again just for discussion. Another thing, and this is an idea that Lorna came up with, and I think is really worth talking about, is the idea of an accountability measure or an annual, like something like an annual catch target, where if we are estimated to reach a certain catch level by a certain day, we would consider taking in-season action. And I thought a lot about this idea as you've all expressed your doubt that 29.6 is the right starting point, and that is a point of uncertainty, and ACT helps us to have a tool to implement it to address that uncertainty. So the kind of action that we could take is if that level is reached after June, it could be to reduce the bag limit further or implement some kind of a depth-based closure. Also, just wanted to note here, and Lauren and I talked a little bit about this, you can do an ACT through the council process and assign some triggers. The one concern I have about that is if when we're looking at the big picture and the take of canary in the non-trawl sector as a total, and it's nowhere near approaching the ACL, would we really need to take some kind of a restrictive action for the Washington recreational fishery to stay under this level? So just something to think about. Again, I think those are tools we could use. In our agency, we have the authority to implement emergency rules that can be more restrictive if needed than federal regulations to keep under the catch. So really, if possible, the goal for tonight is to agree on a preliminary preferred alternative. But I want to be clear that all of these alternatives stay on the table until final action is taken in June. And we can select a final alternative in June that is different than a preliminary preferred alternative that's maybe brought forward for April. Really, the idea here is just signaling to the public the opportunity to provide public comment on the alternatives that we're looking at. I was going to say one more thing. Oh, I did want to say too that I did go through our past specs analysis, and as Lorna has done a really great job of analyzing a large suite of alternatives so that we have a humongous toolbox. The one thing that we didn't do when we went from the 1 and 2 fish bag limit is, you might remember from one of the earlier slides, we analyzed 1 and 2. When we went to no sub bag limit, we didn't analyze 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We didn't analyze any other bag limits other than 1 and 2 until this analysis. So until the analysis is finalized, I don't know that we have those tools in our toolbox. Okay, so ready for the discussion. We've got Rhett, and then Phil, and then Steve.
I just want to say that a bag limit reduction sits better with me than any time area closures. If you keep that in the toolbox, sure. But if we need to approach 25 and 26 at a 4 fish bag limit for canary, keeping in mind that the public at large has not been keyed off to the idea that canary might be trending the wrong way again. That changes people's attitudes and it changes people's behaviors. And you know, I could forego canary entirely, but I can't forego what we've built in this deep water fishery. Even I don't have the number of days plugged in for deep water than I did last year. I've got 9 days worth of salmon rockfish combo trips to do because I get tired of the 7-day-a-week grind in September. I don't want to lose that opportunity. I would rather lose it in a bag limit.
Thanks, Rhett. Phil?
I think my view is that, first of all, with the caveat that I understand when you'll be getting the data, May and June's going to tell a lot. And I believe we get the catch through the end of June sometime in the first 2 weeks of August. I think. Yep. So assuming that's correct, I would take alternative 2, the 4 fish daily sublimit, and I wouldn't do anything else. That understand that that's over the 17 a little, well, 3 tons. But I would try to have an in-season management action that everybody agreed to, that when we get the numbers in the middle of August or the 10th of August or whenever it is, that and if we need to slow it down, then here's what we'll do. Not try to make that up, devise what it is we're going to do in August. Have a preseason plan for an in-season action if we're going too fast. And I would focus on trying to get us up to a number that's in the 2021 area for a harvest guideline instead of the 17 through the one or more of combinations of the allocation proposals that are currently on the table.
Okay. So I have maybe just a follow-up question for Phil before we go to Steve. As far as having like setting preseason so it's clear what we would do if we were to have like this ACT approach, Phil, do you see having that be, so I've written it as to consider, and we could have a very describe what options we might take if we thought there might be more than one. But trying to think about if we hardwire that too much, and like Heather was saying earlier, that the non-trawl ACL isn't at risk of being taken, trying to balance, that against our hardwiring something in through an in-season action.
It's hardwiring. If we take an action, here's what we would do.
Okay.
And maybe there's 2 or 3 actions that we put in the order of priority.
Okay.
Maybe we taking the bag limit to 2, or closing the last 2 weeks of September, or pick. But I'm trying to get us to the point where we're not trying to decide amongst our group what to do in August.
Right.
That we've already said, okay, if we have to do something, here are our choices in priority order.
Yeah.
And that,
okay.
So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think we're thinking along the same lines of what we could consider, but determining that in advance. So it's not a scramble in August. Yeah, definitely
Correct.
there.
Yep.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're not saying we would absolutely do something that is X, because we may not need to. So I want to leave that option. Okay. All right. Then Steve. Thanks, Steve, for letting me jump in ahead of you.
No, that's good. Those Dave and Rhett and Phil have all said stuff that I agree with. And before they started talking, and you said something about an in-season action, and I thought that makes some sense, because after the June fishery, you have some time to assess the number and see what could be available for September to take action. And so if there was an action, I'm not totally clear on this. So say we blew it up in June, caught too many, and something drastic had to happen in September. Would the action be the deep water fishery would be completely closed, or the sub limit, or just no canary retention? Could it still be open offshore so we could, target lingcod, and instead of catching canary, fish for yellowtails? Or would it be a complete closure outside of 50 fathoms? I don't think we talked about that.
No, I think
We're doing it now.
Yeah, that's partly what we're doing.
Okay. Because we can still prosecute our fisheries. We can still prosecute a deep water trip without canary. Canary is a great lure and all that, because they're pretty and all that. But you could still do a deep water trip trying for lingcod and yellowtail rockfish and keep it open, like Dave was talking about. And Red already said he's not planning on going as many days in September, and likewise, we're not either on my boat.
Right.
So you're gonna have some savings anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that sorry, Steve. I think the idea is that, we'll consider, like, if we have that in-season action approach, what would be the first thing that you'd want to do? I'll have to think about this like carefully as like what the triggers are, like what those actual numeric values would be. But would you want to first go to a sub bag limit? And then, you know, depending on where we're at, maybe you need to go further, and the choice would be to, you know, eliminate canary as an option in that deep water fishery. So I think
Yep.
those are kind of the
Lorna.
Mhm.
So, you know, just so you know, if you, I think it would be a good thing, no matter what happened, to have at least a sub bag limit of 1 or 2 in any of your options, because that way you would have, that would eliminate descending, you know, discarding, descending or whatever.
Reduce that, yeah.
Because if you on any trip, if you're not really trying for canary and you're whatever you're fishing for, halibut or whatever, or yellowtails, inadvertently you might catch a few canaries. You might catch none, and you might catch 10 or 20, but if the limit is, the sub limit is still a couple, that's going to cover that, you know, discard. And it's a little bit difficult descending in 600 feet of water. It's not the same as 30 fathoms or less. So yeah, we have a lot to digest here. You guys have done a lot. Yeah.
Lorna. Yeah.
But thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. No, good thoughts here. It's helpful. I guess then Randy.
Yeah, I guess I'm more curious how we got to this point. You know, on that graph on page 8, you know, we've been under the harvest guideline every year. Like there's someplace else the problem is in some other fishery. And I'd like to, you know, somebody said something about the biomass on that graph there. That'd be kind of handy to have year over year and be able to see, you know, where it started dropping and where we were at when we didn't take a change.
Yeah, Randy, I mean, really, the what happened is the new assessment evaluated the stock very differently than the assessment did in 2015. And the really just the size of the stock is different based on how they evaluated it in the assessment. It isn't because a sector took more or less. It was really a function of some of the assumptions in the latest assessment. And you know, our stock scientists believe that the approach they took is the most reasonable set of assumptions, and we are living with the results of that. That's it.
Okay. Yeah, I could live with a reduced bag limit.
Before, I want to give Butch a chance to speak, but I do want to come back and ask you about canary catch on the North Coast. But Butch first.
I appreciate that. Listening to all the back and forth, I do think that, you know, Bill's idea or whoever's idea with the reduction, let it go. But I think it's really important that we have 2 or 3, or you decide the number, sub options within that option that we can model. And I'm sure, Lorna, in your great wisdom of how you do this, you can do some scenarios of some June catches and, you know, figure out what some of those might have to be or what could they be. But I think getting, you know, plan A, B, and C down before Steve and Rhett get grumpy in August and try to do something in the heat of the battle is the smartest way we can do it. And then, of course, we dealing with salmon and all this stuff that we do. Fish never act like we plan, but I think that probably is a best approach that we have to keep, you know, people intact and keep people on the water, inside, outside, wherever it might be. So I support that idea. Thank you. And thanks for all your hard work, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Butch. Are you waving at us?
I'm I'm sorry.
Okay. No, I'm not gonna make fun. I can be clunky on these things. Okay, so I think we were gonna go back to Randy.
Yeah, I'm just curious, you know, just the catch on the North Coast was maybe just lower than I expected for Canary rockfish when we lifted the limits. And I think my question is, are you expecting that to stay the same? Is it not kind of encountered during deep water lingcod trips or halibut like it is off Westport? The abundance of canary is really the heart of it is off Westport and not the North Coast.
Yeah, there's once in a while you'll land on a school while you're deep water ling fishing, but as far as being able to target them, I know my electronics, I can't pick them out.
Okay.
Tom might, if he's able to talk, he might have a little more input on that.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Tom.
Hey, Heather, it's Dave. We don't see them as much as up North Coast as we did down in Westport.
Okay.
I fish both, and it's night and day difference from the North Coast to the South Coast.
Okay. I was just curious. Thank you.
Okay. Phil?
Go ahead, Phil.
I think I'm going to find this out on your next slide. Are we going to have another meeting after the April council meeting to talk about the FPA?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think you've seen our presentation a few times.
Well, for the first time ever, I have control over what slide I'm on, and I can look ahead or behind.
Okay.
And I've never had that. That's why I was on the wrong slide a little while ago.
Okay.
That's pretty
funny. Do you would I'm hesitating because I want to throw this idea out, but I don't want to mess the meeting up. But I wanted it to be something people could think about. The one I told you about today.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you caught what I said. I don't know that we have analyzed a bag limit of 5 or something lower than 7 to be able to implement it before 2025.
I got you. Okay, got it. All right.
I dug into that a bit.
Okay. Okay.
So what I'm hearing is kind of settling around identification of a preliminary preferred alternative that uses a 4 fish bag limit and an ACT. With some triggers, which we can write up in a WDFW report following this meeting that'll be discussed in April, and will go out, or potentially go out, for public review in April. But again, and this is the importance of that meeting in May, all of these alternatives are on the table, and we can come back and in June. We don't have to adopt that as a PPA. If we learn something different, if the trawl or the non-trawl allocation scenarios are different than what we're looking at now, we can explore that. One thing I'm interested in understanding is how specific we have to be with the actions that are taken under an ACT, and we can figure that out. Lorna and I can reach out to Keely and figure that out, because I like the idea and the suggestions that you have is, and especially, the idea of, if possible, allowing retention of 1 or 2 canary rockfish before going to no retention, if that's indeed something we can do. Definitely heard and appreciate your strong input on your preference for not changing the deep water link cod line. And I think we heard that loud and clear and appreciate it. Lorna and I can talk a little bit about that 29.6 starting point and using the average, and if we have any flexibility to do something different there. I'm not sure what that looks like, but also heard you all loud and clear saying it's, well, just, I know it's an unreasonable assumption from your point of view, and you don't expect to see that again. If anything, I think it helps us with an argument that there's some uncertainty in what we'll see. Oh, maybe we should switch to the next slide.
That's somebody else doing it.
Phil, are you? You're moving. We need to go to slide 15, Phil.
I haven't touched anything.
Magic happening. This is crazy.
Yeah.
You want me to do that? Does that help?
No, it should be
There it is.
just, yeah, let it fold there.
Was it me?
Yeah, it was you, Steve, but that's okay.
Okay, sorry.
This is just all in the spirit of collaboration. I gave you guys control as well as
Yeah,
myself.
okay. Sorry.
I didn't know that was possible. So anyway, we're all learning in this new virtual environment.
You could go back.
It might be a bad idea.
Yeah.
This really is just the summary of what we've been talking about. So the next council meeting in April, where we'll be talking about these final preferred alternatives, it's April 6th through 11th in Seattle. It's also a North of Falcon meeting, so I know we'll see many of you in person at that meeting. And then a placeholder for some follow-up meeting in May, get together, regroup, and develop a final preferred alternative for June. The June council meeting is, it's early in June compared to when we normally have it. And that one is in San Diego. So, Lord, I think the supplemental briefing book deadline is very soon. I don't know if we'll have our report. It's actually next Wednesday if we'll have our report for the supplemental briefing book. But if we don't meet that deadline, we'll be sure and send the report to our Bottomfish list, so you have it, even if it doesn't come out in the briefing book. Go ahead, Phil.
I should know this, but on the allocation decisions, are they in the final preferred in April, or are they held over until we do the final on management measures in June?
I think they are a management measure,
That's what, okay. All right.
which would make them, make it
June.
June.
Yeah. But if we have a proposal to change something, we're certainly going to have to get it out there in April.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
Go ahead, Laura.
I'll add something here. While you were talking, I was looking at the bag limit analysis, and at the risk of just doing this on the fly, can share with you, because I did average 2022 and 23. I've got 23 as a standalone, so I've got the data that looks at just like the status quo. If we assume status quo is our projected, we get to a 4 canary sub bag limit that puts us under 17.3. So if we just look at 2023, we still don't get to a 6 or 5 canary sub bag limit, but we do at a 4 fish bag limit get under the 17.3. In contrast to when you average them, that 4 is putting us right at 20. So just looking at 2022, it's about 16.4 metric tons. So not quite 4 metric tons lower, or maybe a little bit more. So I'll be thinking about how to like maybe include that in the report as support for like our proposal. But just to give everyone here on the call an idea that, and it seems like I'm hearing, as well as you, the support for a sub bag limit over any kind of depth restriction. So I think how I write this in the report, I can use the projected as we've presented already. I don't know if I'm having to pull that back. We've got different numbers out there already because of the change from the updates, but I think I can actually capture both a projection that averages across the years and a projection that says we really hear from industry and for all these other reasons why we think it could be lower. So just to kind of add some food for thought here for folks.
And thinking about it, it regardless of what you do of your starting point, you know, we can do a 4 fish bag limit, and then the ACT is going to be moot if 22 is spot on and less, then that doesn't even come into play. If it's different for whatever reason, we have the tool there. But I like your thinking about it, Lorna.
Well, good collaborative thinking, because I was I think partly looking at, again, sort of how to bookend high-low uncertainty of what we might expect in a fishery, sensitive to comments such as, oh, you're just cherry picking, which I've already encountered a little bit of that through discussion, good discussion. It's the kind of discussion we should have through the groundfish management team. So yeah, just trying to really think thoughtfully, but I do appreciate the insight everyone shared here, because I think it's, I'm looking at numbers on paper. Everyone else is also seeing what they're experiencing, and the dynamics in this particular situation are quite interesting, if not unique, to have the kind of targeting in the very specific areas that are being fished. So it'd be a different conversation, I think, if this was a broad coast-wide issue we were dealing with. So anyway, yeah, just kind of wanted to put that thought out there so folks have an idea that we're still looking at like a 4 fish bag limit, regardless of maybe that starting point.
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, thanks you guys. I think you're kind of winding down. So
Mhm.
when we do the meeting in May,
Mhm.
is it possible to do it at 5 instead of 6?
Oh,
I don't know. Just
are
a
we up
thought.
past your bedtime?
Uh-huh. But I know it's not all
Mine
about me.
too.
And then I
Especially
was
in May.
also thinking maybe, I don't, to not do it on a halibut day, but I can't remember what the halibut days are up in the other areas. But
I'll
We
try
have been trying to schedule meeting to avoid halibut days and that
okay,
kind of thing. So definitely.
thanks you guys. You guys do a lot of work, but
Yeah,
we
you
have a
guys,
lot to digest in the next.
Yeah.
See, maybe
Yeah.
you can get a nappy in on the next meeting day. Maybe you get a nappy in and make it.
I know. I picked 6 o'clock. I actually looked at all of the North of Falcon salmon meetings, and thought, oh, they've picked 6 to 8, 6 to 8, 6 to 8. So I thought, well, we'll just slide right in with the Bottomfish meeting at 6 to 8.
don't
I did.
ever use what they do with salmon as, don't ever follow that as a preferred course of action.
Okay.
Go
Do
down
the
to
opposite
Westport
and you'll
goes
be
to sleep
closer.
early.
Or earlier. Okay.
We'll stay unique.
Yeah, I can do that. No, thanks.
Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, thanks. Like others said, thanks for turning over all the rocks here. I mean, we're scratching this thing and trying to figure out the best way forward. So I appreciate it. Can we I know I'm still having nightmares over the meeting in March here for groundfish off California. So it's can we circle back to Vermilion real quick?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe just kind of give us some thoughts there. Obviously, clearly not the same thing as the crisis in California right now, but looks like we've been over. Is there what is the downside of us continuing to be over there, and are there consequences that might result in in-season action or closures?
Yeah, thanks, Larry. I'll start, and then Heather may have some additional thoughts. So we've already been working with our public affairs folks. I think Bridget's on the call. We've got a flyer or poster already developed that will be distributed coast-wide, made available to all our port samplers, as well as to the different offices up and down the coast. So I think part of the problem last year, and I was able to look at the data, and really, had we caught in May the same amount of vermilion that was caught in June, we wouldn't have exceeded the limit. So I really attribute this to just, I would say, a lack of compliance out of ignorance, not a willful lack of compliance. So that was my first thought, is like, do a better job with outreach, Lorna. Make sure people know right from the get-go what fish can't be retained. Make sure all the port samplers. So I've met with our ocean sampling program and attended a training, and also was able to then share sort of the importance of that particular species in the scheme of things. If we have to take in-season action, this is where I think Heather will have to jump in, because I don't know all of what was analyzed, but I do believe we could close additional months for non-retention. But that's where Heather needs to jump in.
Yeah, I think I definitely think we could, and we could do that through our state emergency rule, and we could do it quite rapidly if need be. Yeah, it's a really low number. It's the difference between vermilion and quillback is, vermilion is not in the precautionary zone, so we're not overfishing it. It's just the assessment said there's really just a smaller amount of vermilion off our state than we had understood. And so the harvest level is really challenging. The thing that concerns me the most, though, is the ability for us to collect this biological data that we get, and that is why we intended to keep that uh, discard to May, June, and July, because we wanted to be able to have some retention and some biological data on the shoulder of the bottom fish season, not completely cut off biological data coming in for future assessments. But yeah, it's definitely something to keep our eye on, and really hope that what Lorna said and all the effort she's taken to really flag that for the public and see if we can get a handle on that May catch is helpful.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. I saw right, your hand went up, but went back down.
Anybody else before we wrap it up?
Yeah, we talked about at the last meeting, we talked about getting rid of the 30 fathom restriction in May.
Mm-hmm.
What are the reasons for keeping it? Let's start with that.
Yeah, good question. Well,
I mean, what was the goal? I've kind of forgotten at this point. I know we wanted to reduce the take of something in during the influx of the private boats for halibut.
yellow eye rockfish
and canary.
and canary. Mm-hmm.
So if we're addressing canary separately, I don't.
I'll tell you, Rhett, if that alternative was on the table, it would add additional mortality to canary rockfish that hasn't been analyzed. It could change our ability to use a 4-fish bag limit to reduce canary. And so just starting with that, it would, the analysis of removing the 30 fathom line would change our.
All right. Well, I just want to say that the bulk of the canary take during May occurs outside of 50 fathoms anyways.
I see.
So I really don't believe that having it open out to 50 fathoms is going to make any difference.
I see.
Because there's very few spots inside of 50 fathoms that there's any real congregation of canaries or place where we encounter a lot of them.
Do you think, is this something that we can flag for the next spec cycle as a cleanup? Maybe that could even include the 20 fathom line in the North Coast.
And also, let me and Steve and some of the other guys, I'll get it out to my guys and just kind of give everybody the heads up that we've got a problem with canary, and getting started on it this year will demonstrate that maybe we don't need to have the area closures that could end up happening if we don't. I think we really could demonstrate that we can reduce our canary take aim for a 4-fish bag limit, but let's get started on it this year just to demonstrate that it's possible.
Okay.
But my downside for having that 30 fathom restriction is it sticks me hard on black rockfish for a month, and I would rather be out catching yellowtails.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Understood.
Good. I was gonna ask that. Yeah, it's a bit of a squeeze for sure.
And that's got its own consequence.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm out.
Thanks, Brett. Go ahead, Phil.
Just wanted to thank you guys big time for all your work on this. You've really put a lot of thought into it, and obviously a lot of effort to do the analysis and bring all these different alternatives forward for us. So thanks a bunch.
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks to all of you. Like to going out at the NRB. Really, as always, I want to
Thank you, everybody.
for your input. Have a good evening.
Yeah.
The
Appreciate
override.
it a lot. Yeah, thank you.
The override switch is down at the end of the hall.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you all.
Good night.
Have a great evening.
Too.
Bye-bye. Stop recording. Okay.